Two men are about to kidnap a young woman. Right now, corner booth, table 4. Sarah sees it. The ironed grip on her wrist. The eyes that stopped begging for help days ago. The bag that isn't hers. She's just a waitress, 34, single mom. Nearest cop is 40 minutes away. She has one shot. One. So she picks up the coffee pot, hands completely steady, walks past that booth, and slides a folded napkin onto the window table without breaking stride. Triangle. Fold. Tuck. 12 minutes later, Ray Callahan, president of the Hells Angels, walks through that door. Alone. No sirens, no weapons, just a look that made those two men go completely silent. What happened next? Nobody in that diner has forgotten. This is that story. New here? Stay with me. One question, what was on that napkin? Two men walked into the Copper Kettle at 6:47 on a Friday night. Nobody looked up. That was the thing about rural Montana in October. Strangers came through all the time. Truckers, hunters, people passing through on Route 191 who needed coffee and a warm place to sit for 20 minutes before getting back on the road. The Copper Kettle had seen all of them. Nobody looked up anymore. But Sarah looked up. She always looked up. The two men moved through the door the way people move when they've done something many times before. No hesitation. No glancing around like someone new to a place. The bigger one, broad shoulders, dark jacket, the kind of face that didn't invite conversation, went straight for the corner booth, the one furthest from the counter, furthest from the window, best view of both exits. Sarah noticed the booth choice before she noticed anything else. She always noticed the booth choice. The second man was smaller, quieter. He came in last and positioned himself on the outside of the seat, closest to the aisle, closest to the door, and between them, a young woman, college age, maybe 19. Dark hair, gray hoodie slightly too large for her frame. She moved into the booth the way someone moves when they've learned, recently, that moving slowly and quietly is the safest way to move. Her hands went flat on the table the moment she sat down. Her eyes went straight to the surface in front of her. She didn't look around. She didn't look at the menu. She looked at the table. Sarah set down the coffee pot she was holding. Slowly, quietly. Something cold moved through her chest. The Copper Kettle had been standing on Route 191 for 31 years. It wasn't much. 9 counter stools, 11 booths, a coffee machine that sounded like it was always about to give up but never quite did. The sign outside had been missing the letter K for 2 years. The vinyl on booth 3 had a crack that Sarah had been meaning to report since last spring. But it was warm, the food was honest, and on a Friday night in October, with a cold front pushing down from Canada, every soul within 30 miles seemed to find their way here. Sarah had worked this counter for 8 years. She knew every face, every order, every habit. She knew who was fighting with their spouse and who had just gotten good news and who needed the coffee more than they needed anything else tonight. 8 years had given her something no training manual could teach, the ability to read a room like a language. Fast, instinctive, and right now every single word of that language was screaming at her. She gave them 4 minutes before she walked over. Not too fast. Not too slow. Evening, folks. What can I get started for you? The big one ordered without opening the menu. Black coffee, burger, fries. The smaller one said the same. Quick. Practiced. The kind of men who made decisions fast and didn't revisit them. Then they both looked at the young woman. She'll have the same, the big one said. Sarah kept her pen moving. kept her face completely still. Then she looked at the young woman just for a moment. Just long enough. "How do you want that burger, hon?" A pause. 1 second too long. Medium. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Not soft, careful. The kind of careful that comes from learning that the wrong answer has a cost. "Medium it is." Sarah smiled, collected the menus, and walked back to the counter. She put the order through to the kitchen. Then she stood very still and ran the list in her head. The list she had carried for 15 years. Added to it. Refined it. Never written it down, because some things you don't write down. You just know them. The way you know your own name. The way you know the sound of your daughter's voice. Young woman who doesn't order for herself. Eyes that stay down even when spoken to directly. Clothes that don't fit. Not her clothes. Hands flat on the table. Still. Not relaxed still. Told to be still. No bag, no phone. Nothing that belongs to her. Sarah had been 19 years old when she first learned what those signs meant. Not from a class. Not from a pamphlet. From the inside. 3 months. A situation she had never fully described to anyone, not even to Linda next door, not even on the nights when Emma was asleep, and the house was quiet and the memories came back anyway. She had gotten out. She had rebuilt. She had made something real. This counter, this town, her daughter's laugh, the coffee machine that never quit. But she had never once forgotten what those eyes looked like. And the young woman in the corner booth had those eyes. Sarah picked up the coffee pot and walked to the far end of the counter. Mary. She kept her voice easy, conversational. "You seen Deputy Harris lately?" Mary Collins, 62, County Clerk's Office, Friday pie without fail, looked up. "Harris?" "Lord, no, he's on leave. Family thing up in Missoula." "What about the night shift?" Mary shook her head. "Honey, there is no night shift. 2 deputies covering the whole county on weekends, and one of them's Harris." She took a bite of pie. "Something wrong?" "Nope." Sarah smiled. "Just making conversation." She walked back to the center of the counter. 40 minutes. Maybe more on a Friday night with icy roads. That was how long it would take for anyone with a badge to get here. Long enough for 2 men and a young woman to finish their food, stand up, walk out the door, and disappear onto a highway going north. Long enough for everything to go wrong. Sarah stood behind the counter and breathed. She thought about her options. She had learned a long time ago to think clearly before she moved. Because the first move mattered more than any move after it. Option 1. Call 911. 40 minutes. Maybe 45. By then that booth would be empty and those tire tracks would be cold. Option 2. Walk over there. Say something directly. And watch the big one's hand move to the young woman's arm in a way that said, clearly, without a single word, that she would pay for whatever happened next. Option 3. Sarah's eyes moved to the napkin holder. 3 years ago, on a Tuesday afternoon that had started just as quietly as this, Ray Callahan had sat down at this counter and ordered black coffee and said nothing for a long time. Sarah had refilled his mug twice before he spoke. "We lost a girl," he said. Quiet, looking at the counter. Jimmy's daughter, 18 years old. Gone 4 days before anyone knew what had really happened. He stopped, set his mug down carefully. By the time we understood, it was too late to do it right. Sarah hadn't said a word. "These people are careful," Ray said. "They don't make noise. They move fast. They pick places where nobody's watching." He looked up at her. "You'd see it before I would. You know what to look for." She had nodded. "Just once. You see it, and you can't call anyone, and you can't do it alone. You signal me." Before anything else, you signal me first. They had worked it out right there on a paper napkin. A simple fold. A specific shape. Something that could be placed on a table and look like absolutely nothing to anyone who didn't know. Triangle. Fold. Tuck. Sarah had hoped she would never use it. She reached into the napkin holder. Her hands were steady. She had decided in the space of one breath that her hands were going to be steady. And so they were. Triangle. Fold. Tuck. She picked up the coffee pot, walked to the window table near the door, the one closest to the parking lot, visible from the road, set the folded napkin on the edge, refilled the salt shaker that didn't need refilling, turned around, walked back to the counter like it was nothing, because it had to look like nothing. She set the coffee pot down, looked once at the clock on the wall, 6:59. Then she looked at the corner booth. The big one was leaning forward now, saying something low. The young woman hadn't moved. Hands still flat, eyes still down. But in the single second that Sarah looked, the young woman looked up. Across the diner, directly at Sarah. Sarah didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't do anything that the two men could read. She just held that gaze for 1 second. Long enough to say the only thing that mattered right now. I see you. Stay right there. Then she turned away, picked up the coffee pot, and went back to work. 7 minutes. Maybe 10. Ray would come. He always came. 7 minutes. That was what Sarah had told herself. 7 minutes, maybe 10, and Ray would walk through that door. She had been wrong before. She moved through the diner the way she always moved. Refilling, checking, clearing. Booth 2 needed more coffee. The man in booth 7 wanted extra napkins. Table 5 had finished and needed their check. Normal. All of it completely normal, except for the corner booth. She was tracking it with the part of her brain that never fully switched off. The part that had been running quietly in the background for 15 years, scanning, cataloging, watching for the thing that didn't fit. The big one, she had started calling him Jacket in her head because of the dark jacket he hadn't taken off, was eating fast, not hungry fast, impatient fast, the kind of eating that says I want to be done with this and moving in the next 10 minutes. The smaller one was quieter, slower. He kept his eyes on the room in a way that looked casual, but wasn't. Every time someone walked past their booth, he tracked them for 2 full seconds before looking away. And the young woman hadn't touched her food. It sat in front of her exactly as Sarah had placed it. Burger, fries, coffee going cold. Her hands were in her lap now, out of sight, and she was looking at a fixed point on the table about 6 inches in front of her plate. Sarah had seen that look before, that specific kind of stillness. It was the look of someone who had already decided that the best thing they could do right now was disappear inside themselves and wait for it to be over. It made Sarah's jaw tighten. She turned away and checked the clock. 7:04. 5 minutes since she had placed the napkin. Ray was 14 minutes out when she called. That meant 9 more minutes. 9 minutes if the roads were clear, if he had left immediately, if nothing had gone wrong. 9 minutes was a long time. She was behind the counter refilling the sugar dispensers when Jacket raised his hand. Not a wave, not a polite gesture, the kind of raise that said, "You." Now. Sarah took 1 breath, picked up her order pad, walked over. "Everything okay here? Can I get you anything else?" "Check," Jacket said, not looking at her, looking at his phone. Sarah kept her smile in place. "Of course. Just give me 1 second. I need to close out the table ahead of you first. Our system's been a little slow tonight." She gestured vaguely toward the register. 2 minutes, tops. Jacket looked up at her then, just for a moment. His eyes were flat and patient in the way that certain men's eyes are flat and patient. Not because they're calm, but because they've learned that patience gets them further than anger in public places. 2 minutes, he said. 2 minutes, Sarah confirmed, and smiled, and walked away. She went behind the counter and stood at the register and did absolutely nothing for 45 seconds, while her heart hammered against her ribs. Then she typed something random into the system, stared at the screen, typed something else, bought herself 90 seconds. She glanced at the clock. 7:06. The thing about waiting, Sarah had learned, was that it had a texture. Some waits were soft, the kind you barely noticed. The wait for coffee to brew. The wait for Emma to finish getting her shoes on in the morning. And some waits had edges. Sharp ones. The kind that pressed into you from all sides and made every second feel like something that had to be survived rather than simply passed through. This was that kind of wait. She printed a check she didn't need and walked it to booth 5. Chatted for 30 seconds about the weather with the couple there. Topped up a coffee she had already topped up 12 minutes ago. 7:08. 6 more minutes. If Ray had left immediately, if the roads were clear. She went back behind the counter and looked at the corner booth. Jacket was on his phone again. The smaller one, she'd started calling him Quiet, was looking toward the window, looking at the parking lot, and the young woman. The young woman was looking at Sarah. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. 3 seconds of direct eye contact across a noisy diner on a Friday night, with Jacket 2 feet away and Quiet watching the window and the coffee machine, making its usual sound like a plane that never quite took off. 3 seconds was enough. Sarah had spent 15 years trying to find the words for what she had felt in those 3 months when she was 19. The specific quality of that fear. The way it wasn't loud, it was quiet and heavy, and it sat on your chest from the moment you woke up to the moment you somehow fell asleep. The way you stopped making plans, stopped thinking about next week or next month, started thinking only about the next 10 minutes and whether you could get through them without doing the wrong thing. She saw all of that in 3 seconds, and she saw something else, a question, buried under everything, barely alive, but there. Is there any way out of this? Sarah held the young woman's gaze for 1 second longer than she should have. Then she did something she hadn't planned to do. She looked down, at the floor, at the path between the counter and the back hallway, at the kitchen door that swung both ways and led to the back exit and the alley behind the diner. 1 second. That was all. Then she looked back up and went back to wiping down the counter like nothing had happened, but the message was sent. There is a way. Not yet, but there is a way. 7:11. Sarah was calculating, not panicking, calculating. There was a difference, and she had learned it the hard way. Jacket wanted the check. He'd given her 2 minutes, and it had been 5. She could feel him getting ready to raise his hand again. Men like that had a rhythm, a point past, which patience became something else entirely. She was approaching that point. She needed one more delay, something natural, something that didn't look like a delay. She walked back to the corner booth. I am so sorry about the wait. She shook her head like she was genuinely flustered. I just realized I may have put in the wrong order for you earlier. I wanted to double-check before I ran your check. Did you have the cheddar burger or the regular? Jacket looked at her, flat eyes, patient, calculating. Regular, he said. That's what I thought. I'm so sorry. Our new girl put in the wrong thing and I just caught it. She shook her head again. Let me get that sorted and I'll have you out of here in 2 minutes. She turned to walk away. Miss. She stopped, turned back. Jacket was looking at her with an expression she recognized. Not angry, not suspicious. Something more careful than either of those things. We're not in a hurry, he said slowly. Take your time. Something about the way he said it made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Because it wasn't reassurance. It was a reminder. We're not going anywhere, and neither is she. Sarah smiled. I'll have that right out for you. She walked back to the counter, kept her face completely neutral, set both hands flat on the counter surface, and pressed down hard for 3 seconds. Then she looked at the clock. 7:13. And then, faint, distant, somewhere out on Route 191, she heard it. Low, rhythmic, growing. The unmistakable sound of a Harley-Davidson engine. Then 2. Then more than she could count. Sarah closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she straightened up, picked up the coffee pot, and went back to work. They were coming. Ray Callahan had been eating dinner at Millie's Bar and Grill when his phone rang. 2 miles away. Pot roast. First hot meal he'd had since Tuesday. He left it on the table. He had founded the local Hells Angels chapter 19 years ago in a town that most people couldn't find on a map. 43 members. Men who had come back from wars nobody wanted to talk about anymore, or had grown up in places that had stopped believing in them long before they stopped believing in themselves. Men who had found, in the Brotherhood, something they hadn't been able to find anywhere else. A reason to show up. Ray had been in the Marines for 8 years before that. 2 tours. Places he didn't name in casual conversation. He had come home to Montana with a bad knee, a distinguished service medal, and a very clear understanding of what happened to communities that stopped watching out for each other. He was 52 years old, 6'1", the kind of man who took up space in a room not because he was loud but because he was completely, utterly still. Like something that had been tested by a great deal and had stopped feeling the need to prove anything to anyone. When Sarah called, he had said 4 words. I'm 14 minutes out. He made it in 11. He didn't come in loud. That was the thing most people got wrong about Ray Callahan. They heard Hell's Angels and they pictured chaos. Engines screaming, men spilling through doors, the kind of entrance designed to be noticed from 3 blocks away. That wasn't how Ray operated. The bikes came off Route 191 and into the Copper Kettle parking lot in a single file line. Engines dropping to a low idle as they turned in, one after another. 18 of them. They parked in a wide arc across the lot, not blocking the door, not making a scene. Just there, solid and immovable as a wall of steel. Then the engines cut, all at once. The silence after was enormous. Inside the diner, 3 people heard it and understood exactly what it meant. Sarah, behind the counter, who felt something loosen in her chest for the first time in 20 minutes. The young woman in the corner booth, who looked up sharply at the sudden quiet outside. And Quiet, the smaller of the 2 men, who went very still and looked toward the window. Jacket was still on his phone. Ray came through the door alone. He didn't look around the way strangers looked around. He walked in and like a man who had been here 100 times, because he had, and went straight to the counter and sat down on the second stool from the left. Sarah was there in 4 seconds. "Coffee," he said. She poured it without a word. Ray wrapped both hands around the mug and looked straight ahead at the backsplash behind the counter. He didn't look at the corner booth, didn't scan the room, didn't do anything that could be read as looking for something. But Sarah knew he had already seen everything he needed to see. That was the thing about men like Ray. They didn't look, they absorbed. Walked into a space and within 10 seconds had catalogued every exit, every face, every detail that didn't fit. It wasn't something he had learned. It was something that had been burned into him across 2 tours and 19 years of leading men who needed someone to read a room faster than the room could read them. "Corner booth," Sarah said quietly, not looking at him, wiping down the counter in front of him like they were having the most ordinary conversation in the world. 2 men. Young woman between them. She hasn't touched her food. Didn't order for herself. Ray took a sip of coffee. "How long have they been here?" 23 minutes. The big one asked for the check twice. "I've been stalling." "Good." He set the mug down. "How is she?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "She looked at me about 10 minutes ago," she said. "Really looked?" Ray nodded. "Just once. Anyone else in here know?" "No." He turned the mug slowly in his hands. "Go take an order. Give me 2 minutes." Sarah picked up her order pad and walked away. Ray sat at the counter for exactly 2 minutes and 14 seconds. He drank his coffee. He didn't move. From the outside, from the perspective of anyone watching, he was just a large man in a leather jacket having a quiet coffee at the end of a long day. From the inside, he was running the same calculations he had run 100 times before. Entry points, sight lines, the distance between the corner booth and the door, the distance between the corner booth and the kitchen, the number of civilians in the room and their positions relative to what was about to happen. 12 civilians. 3 staff, including Sarah. 2 targets. 1 young woman who needed to be on the other side of the kitchen door within the next 15 minutes. He finished his coffee. Then he picked up the mug, stood up, and walked toward the corner booth. He didn't hurry. He moved with the specific, unhurried quality of a man who had decided something and was simply now executing it. No drama, no hesitation, no wasted energy. Jacket saw him coming. You could see the exact moment it registered. A slight tension in the shoulders, a recalibration behind the eyes. Men like Jacket were good at reading threats. It was part of how they operated. And something about Ray, the stillness, the directness, the complete absence of any social performance, registered immediately as something that didn't fit the category of ordinary Friday night diner patron. Ray reached the booth and stopped. He looked at Jacket, then at Quiet, then, briefly, at the young woman, just long enough to confirm what Sarah had told him. Then he looked back at Jacket. "Mind if I sit?" He was already sitting before Jacket could answer. The booth went very quiet. Not the quiet of a comfortable pause. The quiet of 2 people recalculating in real time, trying to read a situation that had just shifted in a direction they hadn't anticipated. Ray put both forearms on the table, relaxed, unhurried, like a man who had sat down at this particular booth, at this particular moment, because there was absolutely nowhere else he would rather be. "Name's Ray," he said. "Conversational, easy. I own a place about 2 miles up the road. Come in here most Fridays." He looked at Jacket. "Don't think I've seen you 2 before." Jacket's expression didn't change. "Just passing through." "Sure." Ray nodded. Looked out the window at the parking lot, at the 18 Harleys sitting in the dark, then back at Jacket. Cold night to be passing through. Quiet said nothing. He was watching Ray the way a man watches something he hasn't fully classified yet. Jacket looked at the window, at the bikes, back at Ray. And for the first time that evening, just for a fraction of a second, something moved behind those flat, patient eyes. Not fear. Not yet. But the first edge of the understanding that the room had changed. Ray saw it. He always saw it. He picked up the menu that was sitting on the edge of the table, the one nobody had used, and set it back down. "You know what I like about this place?" he said. Quiet, almost friendly. "Sarah's been here 8 years, knows every face that comes through that door." He paused. Every single one. Nobody said anything. Outside in the parking lot, not one engine started. Not one man moved. They just waited, the way Ray had taught them to wait. Jacket put his phone face down on the table. That was the tell. Ray had seen it 1,000 times. The moment a man stopped pretending he had somewhere else to be and accepted that this, right here, right now, was the only thing that existed. The phone going face down was never casual. It was a decision, a recalibration, a man closing one door and opening another. Ray waited. "Something we can help you with?" Jacket said. His voice was even, controlled. The voice of a man who had talked his way out of difficult rooms before and was preparing to do it again. Ray looked at him for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, just slightly, elbows on the table, voice dropping to just above a whisper, low enough that the booth next to them couldn't hear a single word. "Your name is Dennis Fuller," he said. "Your truck is parked outside, Montana plates. 4GTK 892, registered to an address in Billings you stopped using 8 months ago." He paused. "Let that land. The man next to you is Kevin Marsh. He has a warrant out of Cascade County that nobody's connected to his current ID yet." The temperature in the booth dropped 10 degrees. Jacket, Dennis, didn't move, didn't speak, but something happened behind his eyes. Something Ray had seen before in other men, in other rooms. The specific moment when a person realizes that the walls they thought were invisible have been visible to someone else the entire time. Quiet. Kevin had gone completely still. The kind of still that was different from the young woman's still. Hers was learned helplessness. His was animal calculation. The stillness of something deciding whether to run. Ray watched him without turning his head. "I wouldn't," he said quietly, to Kevin. Without looking at him, Kevin didn't move. Outside, the parking lot stayed silent. 18 men, 18 bikes. Not one of them had moved since the engines cut. They stood or sat exactly where they had positioned themselves, spread across every exit, every angle, every possible path between the diner door and Route 191. They weren't a threat. They were a fact. Ray had taught them the difference years ago, on a night that had ended badly because someone hadn't understood it. A threat was something you could negotiate with. A fact was something you simply encountered, the way you encountered weather or geography. You didn't argue with a mountain. You didn't reason with a road that wasn't there. You simply understood that it was real, and that your options had changed. That was what 18 Harleys in a parking lot communicated, without a single word spoken. Your options have changed. Dennis Fuller was good. Ray gave him that. Most men, at this point, would have started talking, filling the silence with explanations, with deflections, with the verbal equivalent of a man backing toward a door. Dennis sat with the information Ray had given him and processed it quietly. And when he spoke, his voice was still controlled. "I don't know what you think you know," he said. Ray nodded slowly, like a man who had expected exactly that response. "That's fine," he said. "You don't have to know anything." He glanced briefly at the young woman. 1 second, no more, then back at Dennis. "I'm going to ask you to do one thing, just one. And then we're going to sit here quietly until the sheriff's department arrives." Dennis's jaw tightened. "We haven't done anything." "Then you'll be fine." Ray's voice didn't change, didn't harden, didn't warm. It stayed exactly where it had been, level, quiet, immovable. "Let her go to the bathroom." A pause. "That's it," Ray said. "That's all I'm asking. Let her stand up, walk to the back of the diner, and use the bathroom." Dennis looked at him, calculating, weighing, trying to find the angle. There wasn't one. That was the point. Ray had given him something small enough to agree to. Something that looked, on the surface, like a reasonable request from a man who had perhaps misread a situation. Agreeing to it cost Dennis nothing that he could publicly claim to value. But it got the young woman out of the booth. And once she was out of the booth, she wasn't going back. Dennis looked at Kevin. Something passed between them. Then he looked at the young woman. "Go ahead," he said, like it was his idea. The young woman didn't move for a moment. Sarah had appeared at the edge of the booth, materializing the way she had materialized all evening, at exactly the right moment, with exactly the right expression. Calm, unhurried, a waitress checking on a table. "Huh? Can I show you where the restrooms are?" The young woman looked at Sarah. Then she looked at Ray. Ray didn't look back at her. He was looking at Dennis, completely, exclusively at Dennis, giving her the gift of not being watched. She slid to the edge of the seat. She stood up. Her legs were unsteady, just slightly, just for the first step, and then they weren't. Sarah was beside her, not touching her, just present, walking at the same pace toward the back of the diner. Ray kept his eyes on Dennis Fuller. Dennis kept his eyes on Ray, and Kevin Marsh looked at the window, at the parking lot, at the 18 men who hadn't moved. He looked for a long time. Then he looked at the table. Sarah walked her to the back hallway, past the restrooms, past the staff lockers, to the kitchen door. She pushed it open and held it. The kitchen was loud and warm. The line cook, Marcus, looked up with the expression of a man who had learned, over 6 years of working with Sarah, that when she came through that door with that look on her face, the correct response was to ask no questions. He asked no questions. Sarah looked at the young woman. "There's a door at the back of the kitchen," she said. "Quiet, direct. It opens to the alley. Tommy, the big guy by the grill, is going to walk you out. There are 2 men outside that door right now. They're with Ray. They're going to stay with you until the police arrive." She paused. "You understand?" The young woman looked at her, dark eyes, exhausted. Something else moving underneath the exhaustion, something that was only just beginning to understand that the last 9 days might actually, impossibly, be over. "Who are you?" she said. Sarah held the kitchen door open. "Someone who knows what those 9 days felt like," she said. From the inside, the young woman stared at her. Then something happened in her face. Not a collapse, not tears, not yet. Something quieter than that. The specific expression of a person who has been carrying an enormous weight alone and has just, for the first time, felt another pair of hands on it. Sarah nodded toward the back door. Tommy was already there. 6'3", 4 arms like bridge cables, the gentlest man Sarah had ever worked with. He held the door open without a word. The young woman walked toward it. She slowed at the threshold. And then, without anyone asking her to, without anyone guiding her, she stopped, turned back. looked at Sarah one more time. Sarah met her eyes. "You're out. Keep walking." The young woman turned back to the door and stepped through it herself. Not because anyone told her to. Not because someone was holding her hand. Because she decided to. Sarah stood in the kitchen doorway and watched her go. The cold air came through the open door for 3 seconds before Tommy let it close behind them. Sarah pressed one hand flat against the kitchen wall, breathed. Back in the corner booth, Ray was still talking. Still the same voice. Still the same tone. Still completely, utterly unhurried. He had watched Sarah and the young woman disappear toward the back. He had noted the exact moment that Dennis Fuller noted it too. The slight shift in his posture, the recalculation behind the flat eyes. Dennis looked at Ray. "You made a mistake," he said quietly. Ray considered this. "Could be," he said. "I've made a few." He turned the coffee mug slowly on the table. "This isn't one of them." Dennis's hand moved. Not toward anything. There was nothing to move toward. Not in here. Not with what was outside. It was the movement of a man whose body was responding to a situation his mind hadn't finished processing yet. Ray watched the hand. Didn't move. "Dennis." His voice was very quiet now. The quietest it had been all evening. "Your daughter Emma is 8 years old. She goes to Rimrock Elementary. Her teacher this year is Mrs. Patterson." He paused. Let every word land exactly where it was meant to land. "I'm not telling you that as a threat. I want to be very clear about that. I'm telling you that so you understand the level of attention that has been on you. For longer than you know." He leaned back. "The people who sent you here already know you're sitting in this booth. They already know this operation is over. The question you should be thinking about right now is not how to get out of this diner. It's how to make the next conversation you have with a federal agent go as well as it possibly can." The silence in the booth was total. Kevin Marsh had stopped looking at the window. Dennis Fuller had stopped looking anywhere. Ray picked up the menu again. Set it down again. "The sheriff's department is about 12 minutes out," he said. "You want more coffee while you wait?" Nobody answered. Outside on Route 191, the first set of red and blue lights appeared in the distance. Ray saw them through the window. Said nothing. Just picked up his mug and finished his coffee. The first sheriff's deputy through the door was a man named Briggs, 29 years old, 18 months on the job. He came in with his hand on his belt and his eyes moving fast across the room, scanning, assessing, trying to read a situation that had been called in as a possible human trafficking incident at a rural diner on a Friday night, which was not something they covered extensively at the academy. He saw 18 bikers in the parking lot. He saw a large man in a leather jacket sitting calmly across from 2 men who were not moving. He saw Sarah Kowalski behind the counter, arms crossed, watching the door. He made eye contact with Sarah. She tilted her head toward the corner booth. That was enough. It took 40 minutes for the full picture to come together. 2 more deputies arrived within 7 minutes of Briggs. A federal agent, a woman named Carver, who had driven from Billings and arrived looking like someone who had not slept enough, but had been waiting for exactly this phone call, came through the door at 8:41. She looked at Ray first. Ray nodded toward the corner booth. She looked at Dennis Fuller for a long moment, then at Kevin Marsh. Then she said something quietly to Briggs that Sarah couldn't hear from behind the counter. Whatever it was, Briggs's expression changed. Dennis Fuller and Kevin Marsh were walked out of the copper kettle at 8:53, not loudly, not dramatically. Hands behind their backs, heads down, moving through the diner past 11 booths full of people who had gone very quiet and very still without fully understanding why. The bell above the door rang twice. Then they were gone. Sarah stood behind the counter and watched them go. She had expected to feel something enormous. Relief, maybe. Or the specific release of tension that comes after a long time of holding something very tightly. She had expected her hands to shake, or her eyes to fill, or something in her chest to give way. Instead, she just felt very tired. The good kind of tired. The kind that comes after something hard is finished, and you're still standing. She picked up the coffee pot, looked at it, set it back down. Marcus appeared at the kitchen window. "She's okay," he said quietly. "Agent Carver's with her." Sarah nodded. "She asked about you," he said. "She found Lily in the back hallway, sitting on the bench outside the staff lockers, both hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate that Marcus had made without being asked. Agent Carver was seated across from her, notebook open, voice low, and professional and careful. Lily looked up when Sarah came through the kitchen door. Agent Carver glanced at Sarah. Something in her expression, not quite a smile, but close, and she said, "Give us 2 minutes," and stepped away toward the far end of the hallway. Sarah sat down on the bench next to Lily. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The hallway was narrow and warm, and smelled like coffee and the industrial cleaner Marcus used on the kitchen floors every night. Somewhere beyond the wall, the diner was still running, the sounds of it muffled but present. Voices, cutlery, the coffee machine doing its thing. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds. Sarah had never been so grateful for ordinary sounds in her life. "Lily," she said finally. "Quietly, just the name." Lily looked at her mug. "How did you know?" she said. Her voice was steadier than Sarah had expected. Not unbroken, but steadier. "How did you know what was happening?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Your hands," she said. "The way you held them flat on the table. The way you didn't order for yourself." She paused. "The way you looked at the door like you'd already decided it wasn't an option." Lily absorbed this. "Most people wouldn't have noticed," she said. "No," Sarah agreed. "They wouldn't." Another silence. Longer this time. Comfortable, in the specific way that silences are comfortable between people who have understood something about each other without needing to say it directly. "I stopped believing anyone was going to come," Lily said. Her voice was very quiet, not accusatory, just honest, the specific honesty of someone who is too tired to be anything else. "After the 3rd day, I stopped." Sarah looked at her hands wrapped around the mug. "I know," she said. 2 words, nothing else. But Lily looked up at her when she said them, really looked, the way she had looked across the diner earlier in the evening. And something passed between them that was beyond the reach of anything more elaborate. The understanding of 2 people who had stood in the same darkness at different times. "You're from Idaho," Sarah said. Lily nodded. "Boys. First year at Montana State." A pause. "I was 9 days in." "I know." Sarah had heard it from Agent Carver on her way through the kitchen. 9 days missing. Parents who had not stopped calling. A campus that had put her face on every building. 9 days. Sarah thought about what 9 days had felt like from the inside. The way time moved differently in that kind of fear. Not slowly, or not just slowly, strangely. Like the normal markers of time had been removed and replaced with something else entirely. "Your parents know," Sarah said. "Agent Carver called them 20 minutes ago." Lily's face changed. It didn't collapse, not completely, not yet. But something gave way in it. Something that had been held very carefully in place for 9 days finally felt the weight of not needing to be held anymore. She pressed her lips together, looked at the ceiling, breathed. Sarah didn't put her arm around her, didn't say anything else. Just sat there on the bench, present and still, the way someone had not sat with her when she was 19 years old, and needed exactly this. After a moment, Lily looked back down at her mug. "Thank you," she said. Sarah shook her head. "You walked out that door yourself," she said. "I just held it open." Ray was in the parking lot. Sarah found him 40 minutes later, after Agent Carver had taken her statement, after the last deputy had gone, after the diner had finally, slowly, returned to something resembling normal. The remaining customers had eaten and paid and left with the slightly dazed expressions of people who had witnessed something they would be describing for years without ever quite capturing it. Marcus was closing down the kitchen. Sarah untied her apron, hung it on the hook by the back door, and walked out through the front. Ray was sitting on his bike at the far edge of the parking lot, not on his phone, not talking to anyone, just sitting, one boot on the ground, looking up at the sky. Montana sky on a clear October night was something that people from other places never quite believed until they saw it. No light pollution for 50 miles in any direction. Stars from one edge of the horizon to the other, dense and cold and indifferent and extraordinary. Sarah walked over and stood beside him. Neither of them said anything for a while. The other bikes were gone. The chapter had dispersed quietly, the way they had arrived, one by one, back onto Route 191, until the parking lot was just a parking lot again. A few empty spaces, a light above the door that buzzed faintly in the cold. "She's okay," Sarah said. "I know." Ray didn't look away from the sky. "Carver thinks it connects to something bigger. Out of Billings." She said Fuller had been on their radar for 8 months. Ray nodded slowly. Sarah looked at him. At the side of his face in the dark, at the specific stillness he carried that she had never seen in anyone else. Not calm, exactly, but something deeper than calm. Something that had been tested by a great deal and had come out the other side without bitterness. "You're thinking about Jimmy's daughter," she said. It wasn't a question. Ray was quiet for a long moment. "Angela," he said. Just the name. The way Sarah had said Lily's name earlier in the hallway. Just the name, because sometimes a name was the only thing left to give. Angela Reyes, 18 years old. 4 years ago, 4 days too late. Sarah had never met her, but she knew her the way you know people whose absence has shaped the people you love. Angela was in every decision Ray had made since that Tuesday afternoon when he sat at her counter and said, "We lost a girl." Angela was in the Napkin code. Angela was in the 18 bikes in the parking lot tonight. Angela was in the reason Ray had driven 11 minutes in 14-minute roads without hesitating for a single second. She'd have been 22 this year, Ray said. Sarah looked up at the sky. "I know," she said. Another silence, longer. The kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. A semi rolled past on Route 191, headlights sweeping briefly across the lot. And then it was gone, and the dark came back, and the stars were still there, indifferent and extraordinary. "You did good tonight," Ray said. Sarah thought about Lily's hands flat on a table. Thought about a grey hoodie 2 sizes too large. Thought about a young woman stepping through a door on her own 2 feet and deciding, in that specific, private, unwitnessed moment, that she was going to keep moving. "She did good," Sarah said. Ray looked at her for the first time since she'd come outside. Then he looked back at the sky. "Yeah," he said quietly, "she did." Sarah drove home at 11:47, 11 minutes on an empty road, heater on full, radio off. She pulled into her driveway and sat in the car for a moment before going inside, looking at the front of the house. The porch light Linda always left on when Emma was staying over. The small window of Emma's room, dark and quiet. She thought about what she would say to Emma in the morning. Nothing about tonight. Emma was 10 years old and there were things that could wait. But some version of the thing Sarah had spent 15 years trying to find the right words for. That the world had people in it who would show up. That showing up didn't always look the way you expected. That sometimes it was a man on a motorcycle, and sometimes it was a woman with a coffee pot, and sometimes it was just two hands holding a door open at exactly the right moment. That ordinary people in ordinary places could do the thing that mattered. That it was worth paying attention. She got out of the car, walked up the porch steps, put her key in the lock, stopped, looked up at the Montana sky for just a moment, cold and clear and full of stars that didn't care about any of it and were beautiful anyway. Then she went inside. 3 weeks later, Sarah received a letter, no return address, Idaho postmark. Inside, a single index card with 4 words written in careful, even handwriting. "I remember your eyes." Sarah read it twice, stood at her kitchen counter for a long moment. Then she opened the drawer next to the stove, the one with the rubber bands and the spare batteries and the things that didn't have another place to go. And she put the card inside and went to make coffee. The copper kettle is still open on Route 191 in Garfield County, Montana. Sir Kowalski still works the Friday night shift. The napkin holder is still on the counter by the window. In 2026, the National Human Trafficking Hotline receives more than 50,000 contacts annually. If you see something that doesn't fit, trust that feeling. You can report suspicious activity by calling 1-888-373-7888. It's free, confidential, and available 24 hours a day. Pay attention. It costs nothing, and sometimes it changes everything. 4 words on an index card. No explanation, no signature. Just, "I remember your eyes." Sarah put it in the drawer and went to make coffee. Because that's what you do. You keep going. You show up for the next shift. You watch the door. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, that's enough to change everything. If something in this story stayed with you, a moment, a detail, a feeling you can't quite name, tell me in the comments. I want to know which part hit you hardest. This is Heart Tales. Subscribe if you're staying. There's another story waiting for you on screen right now.